Let's break it down straight from the hill to your hometown. No spin, no hype, just facts we find. AI's on the case, no truth left behind. Laws are written, deals are made. Who's got your back, who's throwing shade? We cut through the noise, decode the text, keeping it real. Congress in context, Congress in context, shining the light, breaking it down so you know what's right. Policies, folks, who's working for you? We bring the facts, the power is you.
Welcome to Congress in Context. Today we're really getting into it. We're diving deep into the Congressional Record from May 14th, 2025.
Yeah, you gave us quite the stack of this official record.
We did, and our mission really is to pull out the most significant talks, the legislative pushes, and just the general political vibe from these pages.
Exactly. We want to help you understand what's actually shaping policy right now. Think of it as your shortcut to what happened that day on Capitol Hill.
Okay, let's unpack this then. We're looking at some pretty big topics. There's the whole ongoing thing with preventing Iran from getting nuclear weapons. It's always there.
Always a focus, yeah.
Then we'll shift to domestic stuff. College sports, believe it or not, the Women's Bureau, which is really important, and then the usual debates around law enforcement, healthcare.
It's a lot to cover, but it gives a really good snapshot. So let's start with foreign policy. Representative Baumgartner talked about President Trump's Middle East trip.
Yeah.
What was the main takeaway there?
Well, Baumgartner seemed really focused on what he called realistic American leadership. He was cautious, warning about relying too much on, one-off deals.
Right, and those delusions of grand bargains, I think he said.
Exactly. It felt like he was saying, let's aim for things we can actually achieve and sustain, especially in such a complicated region.
He saw a potential for stronger alliances, sure, but also pointed out the risks. It's that classic foreign policy balancing act, isn't it? Seeking breakthroughs without causing more instability.
Yeah. And then, sticking with the region, the talk turned to Iran. Representative McClintock had a pretty, definitive take on their nuclear program. He was representing the bipartisan Iran Human Rights and Democracy Caucus.
He really did. McClintock basically argued that the only real long-term solution is the collapse of the current Iranian regime.
Wow, okay. So not just negotiation.
No, a much harder line, suggesting diplomacy alone won't cut it. That view, if it gains traction, obviously points towards a very different U.S. strategy, maybe prioritizing regime change.
Okay, and this is where it gets kind of specific and interesting. The record also mentions arms sales notifications. We saw stuff for the Czech Republic and Norway.
Right, these are standard procedures, but they tell you something about shifting security needs. The Czechs are getting these AMPYQ-10AC simple key loaders. Secure comms stuff, basically, and radios.
Okay.
But Norway, that's more significant. They're looking at HIMARS, those mobile rocket launchers, plus GMLRS rockets and even ATACMS missiles.
So for folks listening, what kind of capability are we talking about there? Is it defense, offense?
Well, the HIMARS, GMLRS, and ATACMS for Norway, that's a serious boost in long-range precision strike power. Definitely offensive capability. It helps them deter threats and, pull their weight within NATO.
Got it. And the Czech stuff is more about secure communication.
Exactly. Essential for coordinating operations.
Now, shifting slightly but still international, Representative Sherman brought up something pretty intriguing, a potential gift to President Trump from Qatar.
Yeah, he voiced concern about reports of a $500 million private jet, possibly a gift from Qatar to President Trump.
$500 million. Wow.
Right. It immediately makes you think about potential conflicts of interest, foreign influence, especially since Qatar already has, a lobbying presence. A gift like that would definitely get a lot of scrutiny.
You'd think so. Okay, let's pivot. Domestic policy now. College sports came up. Representative Baumgartner introduced something called the Restore College Sports Act. What's the problem he's trying to fix?
He's looking at the money, specifically how much of it is getting concentrated in just a few big-name athletic programs. He mentioned projections like nearly $21 billion in revenue by 2032.
$21 billion.
Yeah, and over $16 billion of that potentially going to just 54 schools.
Just 54? That's quite a concentration.
Exactly. His worry is that this huge financial gap is wrecking competitive balance and hurting opportunities for athletes at most schools.
So what does his act propose to do about it?
The main idea is to bring back regional conferences, cut down on all the crazy travel athletes are doing now, and also set up a clearer system for sharing the revenue. Baumgartner argued this would help protect Title IXs, keep Olympic sports going since many rely on colleges, and importantly shift the focus back to the student athletes, not just, donors and agents. It's a pretty big proposal to shake up college sports finance.
Interesting. Okay, another domestic issue that seemed to generate some heat was around the Women's Bureau at the Department of Labor. Representative Bonamici sounded pretty upset.
Oh, she was direct.
Yeah.
Very direct. She condemned the cancellation of grants funded through the Women's Bureau, specifically calling out DOGE, that's Elon Musk's team at X, formerly Twitter, calling their actions inept.
Oof. Why such a strong reaction? What did these grants do?
Well, that's the thing. They weren't just abstract numbers. These grants funded really critical program support for survivors of gender-based violence, initiatives helping women get into jobs where they're usually underrepresented.
So like shelters, job training.
Yes, exactly. Shelters providing immediate safety skills training programs that actually had track records of getting women into better paying jobs.
Yeah.
So canceling them had, a real tangible impact on vulnerable people and essential community services.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Right. And Bonamici really stressed that the Women's Bureau is the only federal agency specifically focused on working women's interests. She urged bipartisan support to protect its work.
Okay. Now, a really big chunk of the record for this day seemed to be about law enforcement and public safety. It felt like a major theme.
It definitely was. It was National Police Week, so first off, you had lots of tributes and expressions of gratitude for law enforcement officers. That came from both sides. Representatives Bonamici, Alford, Stitzman, many others spoke about their dedication and sacrifice.
Right, those acknowledgments. But beyond that, there were actual bills being discussed, right? Aimed at the law enforcement community.
Yes. Three main ones were up. H.R. 2240, the Improving Law Enforcement Officer Safety and Wellness Through Data Act. H.R. 2243, the LEOSA Reform Act. And H.R. 2255, the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Service Weapon Purchase Act.
So covering data, concealed carry for retired officers, and letting officers buy their old service weapons.
Pretty much. Data on assaults, expanding where off-duty and retired officers can carry concealed under LEOSA, and the service weapon purchase option.
That LEOSA Reform Act, the concealed carry one, that seemed to stir up some specific debate, didn't it? Especially about where they could carry.
It did. So LEOSA, the Law Enforcement Officers Safety Act, already lets qualified officers carry concealed across state lines. These reforms aim to expand that. We're talking national parks, some federal buildings, public transport, even school zones.
School zones.
Yeah, potentially overriding state laws in some cases. And there was also talk about maybe making the qualification standards less frequent for retired officers to get their privileges.
That sounds like it would generate discussion. Representative Raskin had reservations.
He did. While he acknowledged Police Week, he raised concerns about the LEOSA Reform Act specifically. He argued it might step on states' rights to regulate concealed carry and could lead to situations like off-duty officers carrying high-capacity magazines where state law bans them, including in gun-free school zones.
Okay, so that classic tension between federal and state authority and different views on gun control.
Exactly. And, the partisan divides really showed up, too, especially when talk turned to January 6th and supporting law enforcement.
Oh, right. How did that play out?
Well, Representative Lazer Fernandez and others criticized Republicans. They felt there was a reluctance to fully condemn the January 6th attack and also the pardons given to some involved in attacking Capitol Police. And the issue of not displaying a commemorative plaque for the officers who defended the Capitol, that also became a real point of friction. It just highlighted how deep those partisan fault lines still are, even around law enforcement.
And it wasn't just about January 6th. There were debates about current crime, fentanyl, the border, with different ideas on how to tackle it all.
Of course. Representative Roy, for example, hit hard on sentinel dangers, criticized the administration commuting sentences for drug offenders, and linked border security to crime, a common Republican talking point.
Right, and there was an exchange about the Larry Henderson Act between Senators Murphy and Moreno. What was that about?
So, the Larry Henderson Act proposes a mandatory 20-year sentence for harming a federal officer. Senator Moreno brought it up, kind of challenging his Republican colleagues to condemn assaults on law enforcement, especially thinking about January 6th and the pardons. It really underscored the whole debate about responding to violence against police and the wider issue of political violence.
Okay. Shifting gears again, healthcare and social programs. There seemed to be a lot of concern from Democrats about possible Republican cuts to Medicaid.
Oh, absolutely. Representatives Bonamici, Caston, Espaillat, Fernandez, they were all very vocal opposing potential Medicaid cuts. They painted a picture of really serious negative impacts, millions losing coverage, community health centers struggling, rural hospitals potentially closing.
Yeah, hitting essential services hard.
That was their core message: reduced access to vital health care.
But on the other side of healthcare costs, there was talk about lowering prescription drug prices. Representative Khanna introduced a bill based on something from President Trump.
That's right. Khanna wants to make law President Trump's executive order about most favored nation pricing. The idea is that Americans shouldn't pay more for drugs than people in other developed countries.
So trying to tackle high drug costs, which is something you hear concern about across the board.
Exactly. Though, how and whether these specific methods work is always up for debate.
And the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act that actually passed with support from both parties that came up too, but Senator Durbin had a concern.
He did. Durbin expressed worry that the Trump administration was apparently pulling back funding for things like community violence intervention programs and school mental health grants, things funded by that bipartisan act.
So even bipartisan laws can face funding challenges later.
It happens. Priorities shift with administrations.
And Senator Curtis chimed in on the big picture for Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare.
Yeah, he called for honest conversations about their future, acknowledging the financial challenges, the need for reforms to keep them going, but also warning against using, scare tactics in those debates.
Okay. Now, for a moment of seeming unity, Jewish American Heritage Month and condemning anti-Semitism. Strong bipartisan agreement there.
Very strong. HRS 352 recognizing the month and condemning anti-Semitism got wide support.
Yeah.
Representatives Wasserman, Schultz, and Raskin both spoke, highlighting contributions of Jewish Americans, everything from the slow cooker and shopping cart, apparently.
Huh, really?
Yeah, to, much broader cultural and scientific impacts. It was a clear, unified stand against anti-Semitism.
Good to hear. Another area that sounded like it might have bipartisan legs was about members of Congress trading stocks.
Yes, the Trust in Congress Act. It seemed to have support from quite a few members across the aisle. Cisneros, Roy, Magaziner, Cleaver, Kim, Omar.
Wow, that's a mix.
It is. The goal is pretty straightforward. Stop members and their spouses from trading individual stocks to avoid potential conflicts of interest and, frankly, to try and rebuild some public trust.
And the fact that both Speaker Johnson and former President Trump have apparently shown some support, that makes it interesting.
It suggests it might actually have a path forward, yeah.
Okay. Energy policy. Predictably, different views there.
Oh, yeah. Senator Barrasso hit on a familiar Republican theme, criticizing the previous administration for focusing too much on climate over affordable energy.
Yeah.
But then you had Representative Nadler warning about a Republican bill. He argued it could hurt clean energy investment, raise costs for people, and even push up insurance premiums because of, climate change impacts. So,
yeah,
fundamentally different approaches.
No surprise there. And finally, just rounding things out, the record wasn't all policy fights. There were other recognitions, right?
Absolutely. Celebrations for high school and college teams, academic, athletic achievements, tributes to individuals like Captain Alan Colby Brady, Sergeant First Class Kevin D. Leidlin, commemorations like the 100th anniversary of Detroit Memorial Park.
So those moments that remind you of community and service beyond the Beltway.
Exactly. It grounds the policy debates a little.
So, okay, we've gone through a lot from just one day in the record. When you step back, what are the big themes you see?
Well, just the sheer range of issues Congress deals with simultaneously is always striking. The complexity, you see the constant push and pull between immediate problems and long-term planning. You definitely see the persistent partisan fights over basic approaches. But you also see spots where they can agree, or at least find common ground on specific things. It really is a snapshot of the whole messy, ongoing process of governing.
So for you listening, what does all this mean? Well, this deep dive into just one day shows how complex and, often contentious American governance is. We've touched on huge issues: national security, healthcare, the integrity of the system itself.
And those party divides are obvious, right? But so are those moments of potential cooperation, like honoring police or condemning anti-Semitism, understanding these dynamics, the actual bills being talked about, the arguments. It gives you really valuable context for making sense of the news and maybe anticipating what comes next.
Yeah, this congressional record, it isn't just some dry document. It's alive, in a way. It shows what Washington is prioritizing, worrying about, fighting over, what's shaping the country. Hopefully this walkthrough gave you a few aha moments, maybe a clearer picture of the forces at work.
And now maybe think about it. How do these debates, these potential laws, actually connect to your community, to your life? What role can you, as an informed citizen, play? This record is just packed with stuff to explore further. If something caught your ear, dig into it. Stay engaged.
Absolutely. Thanks for taking this deep dive into the Congressional Record with us.